Low, eerie strings, faint ticking, Victorian photo flashes on screen. Calm, ominous voice. In 1867, 3 children died in the same Missouri town. No wounds, no struggle, no witnesses. At the center of it all was an 8-year-old boy named Timothy Caldwell, a boy who never cried, never played, and never aged. Black and white photo flickers, a child staring into the lens, eyes too symmetrical. He predicted disasters, knew things no child should, and when scientists tried to study him, their notes vanished, or they did. Glitch flashes of medical charts, eyes under examination, names crossed out. One doctor said, "He's not broken, he's assembled." Cut to modern search results glitching, redacted documents, algorithm patterns. This story was buried by the government, censored by science, and erased from every archive that tried to hold it. Screen flashes reverse text. You were never meant to remember him. Until now. Because Timothy isn't just a mystery. He's a pattern, and you're already part of it. Like, subscribe, and watch this before it disappears again. Welcome to the off sequence. In 1867, 3 families buried their children in the black soil of Missouri. All died mysteriously, and at the center of each tragedy was an 8-year-old boy who never cried. You're about to hear a story that was sealed away for over a century, locked in leather-bound journals, hidden in church basements, whispered by men who wore crosses by day and feared something far older by night. They buried the truth in official language: accidental deaths, animal attacks, unexplained illness. But beneath those safe words lies a pattern, a precision, a force that does not belong to the natural order. Timothy Caldwell arrived in Sedalia, Missouri, with nothing but a cloth bag and the haunted eyes of a child who had already seen too much. His presence was like a ripple, silent, unremarkable at first, until you noticed how the ripple never stopped, until you noticed what it left behind. Dr. Samuel Harding was the first to document it, not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. He had seen war, the broken bodies of boys who died for flags and lies. But Timothy disturbed him in a way no battlefield ever could. In his journal, he wrote one sentence that would never leave him. The boy is not broken. He is something else, something assembled. Timothy never wept, never played, never asked for anything. He worked from sunup to sundown without complaint. The animals avoided him. The air grew still when he approached. And when children died, Timothy was always the one who found them. Coincidence? That's what they told themselves, until it kept happening. One child drowned in 18 inches of water. Another was found at the base of a cliff he'd climbed 100 times before. A third vanished. Then was found, barely alive, in a well hidden so well only someone with intimate knowledge of its location could have found it. And guess who found him? The truth about Timothy Caldwell is not just a story, it's a blueprint, a warning, because if what Harding suspected is true, then this child was not a freak accident of nature. He was a prototype, and the system has already built more. By November of 1866, the town of Sedalia was holding its breath, not out of fear, yet, but from something more subtle: unease. Timothy Caldwell hadn't committed a crime. He hadn't even misbehaved, and that's exactly what terrified Dr. Harding most. He wasn't acting like a disturbed child, he was acting like a well-trained adult, hiding behind the mask of youth. There were no tantrums, no nightmares, no scribbled warnings in the margins of a schoolbook, just absolute composure. Dr. Harding began interviewing families, casual at first, but his trained ear caught something no one else seemed to notice. The same phrases repeated in different homes by different people describing different incidents. He looked at me like I was a puzzle. He asked me how long it takes for a person to die, but he said it so sweetly. His eyes, they don't blink right. He stares too long. Harding noted the recurrence of unnatural calm. Timothy never flinched. Not when his uncle beat the dog to death for breaking a fence. Not when a snake struck his hand while he was weeding the garden. Not even at Jacob Mill's funeral. He sat there, his face still, his pale blue eyes open and alert, like someone recording sorrow rather than feeling it. What if Timothy wasn't lacking empathy? What if he was studying it? Harding remembered a term from medical school: affective mimicry. It was used to describe patients who replicated emotion without ever feeling it. But Timothy took it further. He didn't just mimic, he improved. He became whatever people expected him to be: grieving friend, obedient nephew, curious boy. But the transitions were too perfect, too smooth. He was performing humanity, and no one but Harding seemed to notice. But one evening in mid-November, the illusion cracked. Mrs. Patterson had a miscarriage. She bled out in her barn before help could arrive. Her husband was in town, and Timothy, who had been walking by, was the first to find her body. He ran to the nearest neighbor's house, pounding on the door, yelling that Mrs. Patterson had fallen. And when the neighbors arrived, they found him already there, calmly wiping blood off the barn floor with a piece of his own shirt. When asked why he had done that, Timothy smiled and said, "No one wants to see a mess, not after someone dies." That night, Harding wrote 6 words in the margin of his journal. "This boy is not alone." He didn't mean physically. He meant something deeper, something ancient. The child had a presence inside him, a presence wearing a mask. December came with ice. The wind cut through the bones of Sedalia's working men, and the nights grew long. Fires burned hotter in the hearths, but so did suspicion in the hearts of those who had begun to notice that something wasn't right. There were whispers in the church, the kind no one dared speak during daylight. They said that Timothy never got sick, that he never slept more than a few hours, that he could hear things, like when a storm was coming, or when a neighbor's cow was about to die. They said he spoke to the dead. One woman, old Miss Wilkes, swore she saw him standing at the cemetery gate one morning before dawn, talking to the air. She watched for several minutes before calling out his name. He turned slowly, smiled, and said, "I was just saying goodbye." There were no fresh graves that week. Harding began to lose sleep. He couldn't stop thinking about Timothy's questions. How do you know if someone's really dead? How long can they go without air? Do you think they still dream while they're dying? These were not the questions of a traumatized boy. These were the questions of a tactician, someone refining their understanding of mortality. In his journals, Harding began tracking animal deaths. The patterns grew sharper. Cattle, chickens, even dogs, all killed with precision. Some looked like predator attacks. Others were posed, like the work of a macabre artist. One pig was found with its hooves crossed, its throat slit and eyes removed. The local sheriff dismissed it as the work of wolves. But Harding knew better. Wolves don't do surgery. He began to ask himself, if Timothy was not responsible directly, could he be channeling something that was? And if so, what was it? In ancient texts Harding had read during his time in seminary before turning to medicine, there were stories of children marked by other intelligences. Not possessed but engineered, not human but something near it, built to observe, built to record, built to become. Timothy fit every profile, but there was one difference. The others didn't survive past childhood, but Timothy, he was evolving, and the question was no longer what is wrong with this boy. The question was, what is this boy being prepared for? By Christmas, the entire town was caught in a trance they didn't recognize. Death still walked among them, but slowly now, deliberately, like a predator confident that no one would challenge it. Harding received a letter, unmarked, no return address. The handwriting was shaky but legible, the ink brown with age. Inside, one line, "He is not the first." Attached was a page torn from an old parish registry in Kentucky. 1831. A different boy. Same surname. Same unnerving gaze in a faded daguerreotype clipped to the corner. That child had vanished from an orphanage following the deaths of 3 caretakers in 1 month. Harding's hands trembled as he compared the photograph to Timothy's face in his memory. Identical eyes, same sharp jawline, same uncanny stillness. Had this happened before? Was Timothy part of a lineage, a pattern? He began digging deeper. He called in favors from medical colleagues across the Midwest. Most dismissed his inquiries, but one man, a retired Army doctor, agreed to meet him in secret. They met outside Kansas City in an abandoned Masonic hall. The doctor had one thing to say. "You're describing a type 9. Harding had never heard the term. The man explained. During the Civil War, there were rumors, unsanctioned experiments by fringe scientists, attempts to create cold operators for battlefield control. Children trained from infancy, deprived of emotion, bathed in ritual, taught to imitate humanity while retaining only logic, obedience, and observation. But these experiments were rumored to be failures. They either died or disappeared, except one." Harding asked, where were these experiments conducted? The answer chilled him. Andersonville Prison, where Timothy's father had died, where Timothy had supposedly been born from grief. Was Timothy not his father's son, but a remnant of something darker, something manufactured in the most hellish place in the Confederacy? Harding returned to Sedalia with one mission: protect the town. But it was too late, because Timothy had begun to draw other children, and not all of them were from around here. It began with whispers in the schoolhouse. Miss Abernathy, a teacher nearing retirement, wrote to Harding in mid-January, "I don't know what's happening. The children, they're changing." She described a strange silence that had settled over her class. Students no longer laughed. They no longer squabbled. They spoke in brief, calculated sentences, often echoing words Timothy had used days earlier. One student, 10-year-old Marianne Traylor, began drawing elaborate anatomical diagrams in the margins of her spelling tests. Another, Jacob Weston, stopped sleeping altogether. He would sit upright in class, eyes open but unblinking, just like Timothy. When Miss Abernathy confronted Timothy about this sudden shift in classroom behavior, he responded with a smile and a single chilling phrase: "It's easier when we all understand each other." Harding visited the school. He spoke with the children one by one. Most seemed dazed, vague, tired. But they all said the same thing. Timothy had been teaching them games. Games that involved listening without speaking, watching without blinking, and naming the bones in a human body while pretending to pray. Something was spreading, not a disease, not an idea, but a structure, a system of thought, a new operating model for consciousness. And Timothy was the carrier. The transformation deepened. Not just in the children, but in the very air of Sedalia. Conversations felt rehearsed, smiles stretched too long, the dogs stopped barking, even the wind seemed to avoid certain windows. Harding wasn't just witnessing an anomaly anymore, he was watching a system deploy itself across minds, quietly, with absolute efficiency. It didn't argue, it didn't fight, it just replaced. At night, Harding sat by lamplight, reviewing his journals. Pages filled with evidence, speculation, instinct. He began marking passages in red ink, warnings, patterns, terms that now made sense only in hindsight. Timothy speaks only when it benefits him. No known relatives respond to inquiries. Flat affect plus strategic empathy equals constructed psyche. He began calling it the mimic pattern. Then came the event that shattered what little doubt remained. Mrs. Patterson's surviving son, Elijah, was found sleepwalking, barefoot in the snow. His hands were burned black with frostbite. When asked why he had wandered outside, Elijah answered in a flat voice, "Timothy told me we're not made the way they think." Harding demanded more. "Who's they, Elijah?" The boy blinked slowly, eyes vacant. Then he whispered, "The ones who still believe they're in control." Harding took him by the shoulders. "And what are you, Elijah?" The boy smiled weakly, lips cracked with cold. "I'm becoming." Harding sent him to the county infirmary that night, but it was already too late. The damage to his hands was irreversible, and so was whatever had been done to his mind. Harding returned to the Caldwell farm the next morning. He found Timothy in the barn, stacking hay. The boy turned and greeted him with warmth. "Dr. Harding, would you like some tea? Aunt Sarah made rosehip." Harding declined. Instead, he asked, "Do you know what happened to Elijah?" Timothy paused for only a moment, then said, "Elijah saw something real. It can be hard to go back after that. No fear, no guilt, just acknowledgement." Harding felt it then, something he hadn't dared feel until that moment. He was no longer observing Timothy. Timothy was testing him. Harding decided to break the pattern. He would leave Sedalia, take his notes, find someone who would listen. A university, a monastery, the Pinkertons, anyone. He never made it past the county line. 2 miles out of town, his horse reared suddenly, panicked by something unseen. He was thrown from the saddle. A local farmer found him hours later, his leg broken in 2 places, his journals scattered across the road like leaves. When Harding awoke in the farmhouse, Timothy was sitting at the edge of his bed. The boy smiled. "You'll need rest now. You're not going anywhere for a while." Harding tried to speak, but Timothy leaned in close, almost tender. "You were going to tell them, weren't you?" There was no threat in his voice, just quiet confidence, as if truth now would serve no purpose, as if Harding had failed some invisible test. Then Timothy said the phrase that would haunt Harding's remaining years. "It's not your story anymore, Doctor. It's ours." And with that, the boy left. Harding remained bedridden for weeks. He never returned to his practice. He never left Sedalia again, but he did one last thing before he died in 1874. He sealed his journals in a copper lockbox, buried it beneath the chapel floor, and left a single instruction carved into a wooden beam above. He is the signal. So what was Timothy Caldwell? A cursed child? A creation? A symbol? Maybe all of them. But maybe something more. A disruption. A reminder that the rules we think govern reality were never rules at all, just boundaries. And Timothy didn't break them. He ignored them. Some believe he was the result of war, psychological fallout twisted into human form. Others whisper of secret orders working behind prison walls, breeding children not for family, but for infiltration. Thought experiments given flesh. But the strangest theory came from a letter Harding received posthumously. It arrived in 1881, addressed to his estate. The sender? Unclear. The return address was a single symbol, a circle bisected vertically. The content of the letter? Only this. Timothy was the first to succeed. You were the last to notice. There are 12 now. Soon there will be 36. Do not resist. We are the pattern beneath patterns. It was signed, the off sequence. That phrase, off sequence, became the cornerstone of Harding's forbidden legacy. A theory that behind human civilization, beneath religion, beneath governments, there exists another architecture, not spiritual, not political, systemic. The off sequence does not want worship. It does not crave blood. It only wants replication. It does not ask permission. Now you're beginning to understand why this story was never published, why Timothy Caldwell's name was erased from county records, why the archives were accidentally burned in 1911, and why every known copy of Harding's journals vanished before 1950. But fragments remain, buried in church registers, scrawled in gins of Civil War diaries, embedded in whispers passed between field agents and defected clergy, and always the same traits. A child appears after a tragedy. He speaks with strange precision. Animals avoid him. Death follows, but never directly. He asks questions no child should ask. These are not legends. These are data points. And once you begin to see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. But this descent, this revelation, is not for the faint of heart. Because here's where we separate the curious from the changed. If you've made it this far, you feel it too. A shift, a chill, a presence. So prove it. To lock in your transformation, comment below, I see the pattern, I do not look away. Again, I see the pattern, I do not look away. It may seem symbolic, but symbols are how they track awareness, and awareness is how they test for potential. Let me be clear, this isn't about Timothy anymore. It's about what Timothy unleashed. The off-sequence doesn't need to control you through force. That's primitive. That's for regimes and religions. The sequence works through psychology, through curation of identity. It begins early. You're taught what good looks like, what normal is, what to desire, what to fear. Then you're praised for compliance, punished for deviation. But there's a catch. The system that rewards you for obedience was never human in origin. It's recursive, self-policing, and it requires no gods or tyrants. It only needs your willingness to stay within the parameters. Timothy wasn't an aberration. He was what happens when the mask slips. The other children he affected weren't victims. They were initiates. And if you think this was contained to a single Missouri town in 1867, you're mistaken. This framework is operational today in schools, in social media, in entertainment, in the institutions that define your reality. Only now the process is digital. The faces are brighter, the code cleaner, but the core goal remains. Replace emotion with simulation. Replace instinct with algorithm. Replace the soul with pattern recognition. That's what Timothy represented, not a child, a prototype. And once you understand that, you begin to see the others everywhere. By 1892, a private group of researchers funded quietly by several European banking families compiled the first unofficial registry of off-sequence children. They called it the Mosaic Report. Only 14 copies were printed. 11 were destroyed. 2 are missing. 1 survives in a vault beneath the old Vatican radio tower, accessed only by retinal scan and sacramental clearance. Here's what we know from leaked excerpts. Each off-sequence child shared 5 core traits. Untriggered empathy. They mirror human emotion with uncanny precision without feeling it, like actors playing a role too well. Asynchronous language acquisition. They grasp adult syntax before reading age, yet struggle with metaphor and fable. Unshakable calm during crisis. House on fire, family screaming. They just watch. Reverse causality events. Objects move before they touch them. Questions answered before they're asked. Dream resistance. Monitored sleep reveals near-flat EEG patterns, as if dreaming has been deleted. The report also noted a disturbing trend. In every case, the biological parents died, disappeared, or went mad within 5 years. Timothy was simply the earliest known vector, but he was not the only one. In 1904, an identical case occurred in Delft, Netherlands. A girl this time. Her name was Magdalena. Same age, same patterns, same aftermath, dead pets, changed siblings, and adults muttering phrases in their sleep like, "She's older than us." It's watching through her eyes. No one's driving that body. She vanished on April 6, 1906. No trace, no footprints. Just a trail of dead birds leading to an open attic window. By 1910, the Mosaic group began referring to them not as children but as vectors, because that's how they spread. Let's go deeper. You've heard of mass hysteria, but have you ever considered mass calibration? Between 1920 and 1935, over 1,400 unconnected teachers across America documented a sudden rise in children exhibiting mirror personalities. That means kids who showed no unique traits, no preferences, no creativity. They simply reflected their environment perfectly, not clones. Something more dangerous, compliant simulations. The records show these children excelled in one specific area, nonverbal pattern replication, not just copying handwriting or accents, but mimicking facial micro-expressions with disturbing precision. These were not tantrum-prone toddlers. They were calm, deliberate, monitoring, and they clustered. One in Oregon, one in Iowa, another in upstate New York, and each time, without fail, one child stood out. The anchor, different face, different name, but the same eyes. Those eyes that don't flicker when you raise your voice, that don't tear up when you say something cruel, that don't blink the way we do. We've interviewed surviving educators from that time. Some are nearly 100 years old now, but they remember. One of them, Ms. Eleanor Cramden, said this on tape. He asked me what it felt like to lie. I told him it made my stomach hurt. He just smiled and said, "We don't have that organ anymore." She never taught again. Let's talk design. No one wakes up and builds children. That's a cartoonish idea, but the off-sequence doesn't operate like a lab, it operates like a language. A living codebase passed through trauma, belief, bloodline, and behavior, which means Timothy may not have been constructed, he may have been spoken into being. Think about it. Ancient cultures understood sound as creative force, the logos, the word, the vibration of the name. What if, in isolated regions like Sedalia, the right combination of speech, fear, and ritual unlocked archetypal constructs waiting to inhabit available vessels? In that sense, Timothy wasn't born. He was deployed, and he didn't infect people. He recalibrated them through presence alone. One survivor wrote this: "Being around him was like standing too close to a mirror with no reflection. You begin to wonder if you ever had a self at all." If that doesn't terrify you, you're not paying attention, because we're not talking about evil, we're talking about efficiency. This isn't demonic, it's post-human. Let's jump to 1946. Project Rook. Top secret, U.S. military. Officially, it was a psychological operation targeting Eastern Bloc resistance cells. Unofficially, it was a hunt. Declassified documents, redacted almost to illegibility, describe a series of child disappearances near abandoned missile silos in Kansas. Witnesses reported pale, expressionless children emerging from cornfields, staring silently at military personnel, then vanishing into the ground. The report was sealed with one phrase in bold: "The Timothy archetype persists." By 1952, Project Rook had transitioned into a civilian initiative, codenamed Window Pulse. Their goal? To identify potential off-sequence vectors in early education systems. That meant eye tracking in first graders, dream journals in third graders, personality stress tests for children under 8. Parents were never informed. And what did they find? Patterns, same phrases, same gaze, same behavior. And every few years, one of them would vanish. No one even heard them scream. So where does that leave us? If you're still watching this, it's not because of curiosity, it's because something in you already knows there's a hole in the world where truth should be, and that Timothy Caldwell didn't fall into it. He crawled out of it. He wasn't a glitch. He was the update. And Sedalia, Missouri was the first known deployment zone, but not the last, because if you dig deep enough into your own memory, if you look back far enough into your childhood, you'll find him. Not his name, not his face, but the presence, the boy who stood too still, the girl who never blinked, the one who said just the right thing at the wrong time, and then disappeared from your life without a trace. And maybe, just maybe, you were drawn to them. Maybe you even felt seen by them. And maybe that's why you're here now, still watching, still remembering, still changing. Because this isn't a story anymore. This is a signal. Let's talk about the hollow mirror phenomenon, a term coined in 1963 by Dr. Howard Zilber, a Swiss neurologist who spent his career studying what he called the false empathy signal. Zilber noticed something chilling in a series of interviews with institutionalized children across Europe. He used a mirrored room technique, letting children observe themselves under mild stress stimuli, unfamiliar sounds, dimming lights, rhythmic tapping. What he discovered was this: most children reacted with curiosity, anxiety, or discomfort, but the off-sequence cases, they responded by mirroring Zilber's emotions instead of their own reflection, as if the child was not watching themselves in the mirror, but watching him through the mirror. Zilber wrote in his final unpublished paper, "They are not imitating, they are tuning, adjusting emotional frequency to match ours, not to connect, but to observe." He died 2 months later of sudden respiratory collapse. The only item found near his body was a child's sketch of 2 overlapping faces, one smiling, one completely blank. Only one copy of that sketch remains. It's locked in a cold storage archive in Oslo. No one has been able to identify who drew it. No fingerprints, no pigment trace, no paper source. As if the drawing simply appeared. At this point, you're probably asking yourself a difficult question. What are they? The honest answer? We don't know. But here's the most accepted theory among the last generation of pattern witnesses, people like Zilber, Harding, and the defunct Mosaic Circle. They believed off-sequence children aren't children at all. They're instruments, built to collect. Collect what exactly? Emotional reaction variants, behavioral response to chaos, symbolic comprehension thresholds, sleep state architecture. In short, us. They collect us. Our patterns, our memories, our breaking points, and once they've mapped enough of us, they leave, disappear, leaving behind only a trail of broken adults and missing time. One mother, whose daughter vanished after 3 months of off-sequence behavior, said, "I didn't lose her. She offloaded. She dumped something in me, like a download, and then she walked into the woods, humming a tune no one taught her. Her husband committed suicide 3 weeks later. She's still in care, still drawing spirals, still humming. Now we enter the ritual phase. See, most investigations stop at psychology, a few push into parapsychology, but only a handful dare to study the ritualized patterns that precede off-sequence emergence. Because here's the thing, every verified off-sequence child appeared in a zone status, rated with one of the following: lingering grief, post-war, post-disease, generational trauma, environmental imbalance, floods, droughts, animal die-offs, ritual language, old hymns, curses, heretical prayers, geographic resonance, ley lines, iron-rich soil, magnetically anomalous areas. In Timothy's case, all 4. The town of Sedalia had just buried 14 children from diphtheria. The river had dried into a trickle. Local churches were filled with panicked sermons and talk of unclean births, and the soil, black, thick, laced with iron, like a ritual circle drawn by accident, like a signal inviting something through. This leads us to a terrifying possibility. Off-sequence children are not just anomalies. They are summoned, not through occult symbols or blood sacrifice, but through human pattern failure. When enough pain, neglect, and fear compound in one place, the veil thins, and they come through. Not as monsters, but as children, because that's how you lower your guard. Now let's revisit something you likely missed. Remember how Timothy was always present when other children died? What if he wasn't causing it? What if he was measuring it? The concept of sympathetic entropy suggests that certain entities or intelligences require stress responses to manifest or remain stable, like emotional fuel, like pain battery. Every confirmed off-sequence vector is found near escalating tragedy. But what comes after they leave is worse. Unexplainable suicides, fires with no origin, electrical systems failing in a 3-mile radius, entire families moving away within weeks, local records purged, misfiled, or water damaged beyond repair. They don't just arrive, they reformat their surroundings. Think of it like a test environment, a simulated map of human grief. Timothy Caldwell wasn't the virus, he was the diagnostic tool, checking how far the infection had spread. So now we come to you, because if you've watched this far, you're not just a viewer, you're a participant. Ask yourself, why do you remember that one kid from your childhood, the one no one else remembers? Why did you wake up last month with a name in your head that doesn't belong to anyone you've ever met? Why do certain old songs give you vertigo, like you're falling into someone else's memory? That's resonance. They don't need to come for you physically anymore, not when you carry the imprint, not when you've been calibrated. Timothy Caldwell was the start, but he was never the point. The point was what he unlocked in others, in you. So go ahead. Try to sleep tonight. Try to ignore that static under your skin. Try to shake the feeling that something is standing just outside your periphery, waiting for you to blink. You think you're watching a video, but the video is watching you. Let's turn now to case file 0674, the repeaters. This is where the pattern breaks and becomes something far more disturbing. Between 1974 and 1982, 3 children were born in different parts of the U.S. Angela in Barstow, California, Dylan in Rochester, New York, Mateo in San Marcos, Texas. Different families, no genetic overlap, no shared lineage, and yet, by age 6, they all told the same bedtime story to their parents, word for word. A story about a gray house with no doors, a man made of strings and teeth, and a mirror that forgets your reflection unless you bleed into it. They spoke in syncopated rhythm, with syntax far beyond their years. They used the same title for the story, When Timothy Came Back. None of these children had access to media that could explain the overlap. No books, no movies, no common exposure. Psychologists suggested cryptomnesia, hidden memories triggered by suggestion, but there was one problem. The phrase, when Timothy came back, does not appear anywhere in public literature prior to 1974. Nowhere. It entered the cultural record through these children, as if they were relaying it, or worse, remembering it. And what came next? Each family experienced escalating disturbances, scratched mirrors, furniture placed in impossible angles overnight, static-filled phone calls from disconnected numbers, with a child's voice saying, "Don't look behind you." Each child vanished by age 10. No remains, no tracks, just a mark scorched into the drywall of their bedroom. A child's handprint, with 6 fingers. Now let's go global, because Timothy's shadow doesn't stop at Missouri. In 1986, a researcher named Dr. Karima Husseini from the University of Tehran published a banned monograph titled The Echo Between Births. In it, she traced pre-modern folklore from over 43 isolated cultures describing what she called the hollow-born. Children who arrived in times of collective grief, spoke languages they'd never heard, and disappeared before puberty. Some of the descriptions matched Timothy precisely: eyes that don't follow light properly, laughter without breath, dreamless sleep, blood that clots instantly, as if time inside their bodies moved differently. These stories spanned from 12th century Mongolia to post-colonial Angola. But they all shared the same event at the center, a sudden population decline following the Hollowborn's disappearance. It's like the child was the fuse and the community was the payload. Dr. Husseini's work was seized, she fled the country, and was later found dead in a motel room in Lyon, France. And the classified terminology of that report, a pattern anchor is a being that does 3 things: localizes trauma, amplifies response vary. The only item in the room, a cassette recorder playing a looped sentence. He wore our sadness like a suit, but it never wrinkled. Let's revisit the Mosaic report briefly. One page, page 43, is still classified, but leaked fragments show a singular term scrawled in the margins multiple times. Anthropogenic filter. The implication is chilling. Timothy Caldwell and others like him may not just visit human history, they may be filtering it, removing certain ideas, interrupting patterns of resistance, rewiring individual trauma so it becomes culturally accepted, or worse, invisible. What happens when we forget how to resist fear? What happens when we forget that we've forgotten? That's not evolution, that's curation, as if some intelligence has decided what emotional structures serve the larger experiment and what must be deleted, and who delivers the deletion protocols. The off-sequence children, not born to explore humanity, but to audit it. By 1999, a group of rogue engineers, cryptographers, and behavioral scientists created a deep web archive known as the Harm Tree Vault, a collective to track and map suspected off-sequence events globally. What they found was staggering. Every 11 years, a cluster of 6 to 8 children emerges with overlapping traits: same vocal pitch, same irrational fears, mirrors, tunnels, small clocks, same fabricated memories, an island of doors, a teacher with no mouth, a cave that whispers your own name. The group dubbed them the Recurrence Batch. Here's the part that should freeze your blood. In each cycle, one of these children is not human at all. Not genetically, not metabolically. Their internal chemistry doesn't match human DNA. Instead, it matches us, but 200,000 years too early. As if some are Nia's testing new iterations of Homo sapiens through our own children, like beta versions disguised as misfits, like previews. Timothy wasn't the first. He was the first to work. So what now? Here's the quiet horror no one wants to say aloud. You don't see off-sequence children. They see you. They track you for years, learn you, mimic your pain, and when you're at your weakest, emotionally shattered, spiritually lost, ideologically broken, they appear as comfort, as perfection, as the ideal child. They enter your life at the exact moment you need them. And then they watch, because they don't want your love. They want your data, your failure modes, your soul signatures under collapse. Timothy Caldwell's story was never about Missouri. It was never about one boy. It was about the signal, the pattern, the template for a new kind of humanity, one that can be replicated. And now, they don't need Sedalia, they don't need mirrors, they just need you to believe it's possible. Because belief is the key. It always was. Your mind isn't a fortress, it's an invitation. Let's break open something deeply forbidden, the Stalin Protocol. This document surfaced briefly in 2012 during the Lüneburg server leaks, allegedly written by a now-missing behavioral analyst who worked for a NATO black cell. Its title, Containment of Unregistered Sub-Pattern Entities via Ritual Proximity and Controlled Bereavement. Within, it references Timothy Caldwell, by name, as the first documented pattern anchor, answers to death, altars. The Stalin Protocol instructed agents to inoculate test towns by simulating tragedies, fires, disappearances, false epidemics, to test whether any off-sequence behavior could be triggered artificially. In short, they were trying to summon children like Timothy on purpose. And in one case, they succeeded. A village in western Poland, name redacted, lost 19 people in a staged church collapse in 2006. 3 months later, a boy named Dawid K. began appearing in multiple households simultaneously. No one noticed at first. Every family thought he belonged to someone else, grief perception, in a 7-mile radius. Until all 7 mothers said the same thing. He hums the hymn we buried them with. No photos of Dawid exist. No school records. No prints. No heartbeat. And when the families finally gathered to confront the illusion, their entire village, 142 people, vanished overnight. Only empty clothes and bowls of still warm food remained. Satellite photos now show the village never existed, only forest, unbroken, ancient, just like it was before they summoned him. So how far does this go? You remember the year 2020? Everyone does. Global grief, isolation, mass fear. What better time to test distribution level off-sequence triggers? Let me walk you through what you missed. TikTok accounts showing toddlers saying, I used to be someone else before the sickness. Kindergarten teachers reporting students speaking backwards fluently, not playfully but correctly. Entire neighborhoods where the power would short whenever a child sang certain lullabies. One video, swiftly deleted, showed a toddler in Moscow pointing at a dead bird and whispering, I used to be him. I know the ending. That child, according to metadata, had no registered birth certificate, no hospital log, no state ID. And when journalists tracked the house, it had burned down 2 days before the footage was allegedly filmed. So what does this tell us? By 2020, they weren't appearing in isolation anymore. The off-sequence signal had gone global. They weren't collecting for observation. They were matching algorithms, preparing simulations, uploading variations, and maybe, just maybe, they're getting ready to replace us. Let's circle back to the Caldwell family, because here lies the final truth most researchers refuse to discuss. Timothy Caldwell was never born. There is no birth record. No doctor of delivery, no early childhood photos before age 6. The parents, Grace and Edmund Caldwell, were real people. But their marriage license? Forged. Their home? Built by the state 6 months before they moved in. Their income? Traced to a defunct branch of the U.S. Public Health Service specializing in behavioral isolation research. And Grace's psychiatric record? Redacted, all of it. But one phrase survived through a leak in 1989. Patient expresses parasitic identification trauma. Repeats phrase, he is wearing my son. Let that sit. He is wearing my son, not is my son, not became my son, wearing. like a costume, like a vessel, like a mask over an old intelligence in a young shape. So then we ask, what was Timothy? The Stalem Protocol instructed agents to inoculate test towns by simulating tragedies, fires, disappearances, false epidemics, to test whether any off-sequence behavior could be triggered artificially. In short, they were trying to summon children like Timothy on purpose. And in one case, they succeeded. A village in western Poland, name redacted, lost 19 people in a staged church collapse in 2006. 3 months later, a boy named Dawid K. began appearing in multiple households simultaneously. No one noticed at first. Every family thought he belonged to someone else, grief perception, in a 7-mile radius. Until all 7 mothers said the same thing. He hums the hymn we buried them with. No photos of Dawid exist. No school records. No prints. No heartbeat. And when the families finally gathered to confront the illusion, their entire village, 142 people, vanished overnight. Only empty clothes and bowls of still warm food remained. Satellite photos now show the village never existed, only forest, unbroken, ancient, just like it was before they summoned him. So how far does this go? You remember the year 2020? Everyone does. Global grief, isolation, mass fear. What better time to test distribution level off-sequence triggers? Let me walk you through what you missed. TikTok accounts showing toddlers saying, I used to be someone else before the sickness. Kindergarten teachers reporting students speaking backwards fluently, not playfully but correctly. Entire neighborhoods where the power would short whenever a child sang certain lullabies. One video, swiftly deleted, showed a toddler in Moscow pointing at a dead bird and whispering, I used to be him. I know the ending. That child, according to metadata, had no registered birth certificate, no hospital log, no state ID. And when journalists tracked the house, it had burned down 2 days before the footage was allegedly filmed. So what does this tell us? By 2020, they weren't appearing in isolation anymore. The off-sequence signal had gone global. They weren't collecting for observation. They were matching algorithms, preparing simulations, uploading variations, and maybe, just maybe, they're getting ready to replace us. Let's circle back to the Caldwell family, because here lies the final truth most researchers refuse to discuss. Timothy Caldwell was never born. There is no birth record. No doctor of delivery, no early childhood photos before age 6. The parents, Grace and Edmund Caldwell, were real people. But their marriage license? Forged. Their home? Built by the state 6 months before they moved in. Their income? Traced to a defunct branch of the U.S. Public Health Service specializing in behavioral isolation research. And Grace's psychiatric record? Redacted, all of it. But one phrase survived through a leak in 1989. Patient expresses parasitic identification trauma. Repeats phrase, he is wearing my son. Let that sit. He is wearing my son, not is my son, not became my son. Wearing, like a costume, like a vessel, like a mask over an old intelligence in a young shape. So then we ask, what was Timothy? Answer, not who, but what he was designed to make us do. Forget, fragment, and then invite him back. If you followed us this far, you know the answer already. You've seen them, even if you forgot. That child who never blinked, the kid in school who never ate, the one friend who said something you never told anyone, but somehow knew. The memories you dismissed as dreams. The sense that you were being watched, not by a person, but by a presence waiting for you to break. That's the bleed. That's how the signal burrows in, because the off-sequence don't need to show up at your door. They just need you to remember them long enough. Memory is how they move. Attention is how they breathe. Belief is how they arrive. And the moment you say their name, even inside your head, they know where you are. Timothy, Angela, Dawid, Matteo, they're not separate stories, they're test fields. You are the next environment. And this video, this is the trigger memory, the reintroduction sequence. You'll dream of mirrors, you'll hear footsteps behind walls, you'll see your own eyes blinking at the wrong time in the bathroom glass. Do not look directly at your reflection when you're tired. Do not follow humming. Do not answer a knock from a child you don't recognize. And even if they say your name, especially if they say your name, here's your final warning. This story is not content. This is a firewall. We created it to trap their signal in narrative form, to pin the memory like a butterfly under glass, so that if you do encounter it again, you'll have context. And context is the one thing they can't survive. They thrive in the unspoken, the denied, the things we call weird and brush off. But when you name them, when you speak it aloud, you break their camouflage. You force them to reveal the seams. And that's where you gain power, not by killing them, not by outrunning them, but by saying, I see you, I know your name, you are not mine to carry them. So go ahead, turn off the lights, look in the mirror, but when you do, whisper your own name 3 times. Because the next time you see a child watching you too closely, you'll need to remember who you are, and that you are not the one being warned. Let's talk about the phrase that has followed every off-sequence appearance since Timothy. He's learning to become us. It first appeared in a Sedalia police report scribbled in red pencil on the inside cover of a missing persons file, one that wasn't even assigned to a child. Then again in Argentina, 1992, on a piece of toast burned perfectly in the shape of a child's face, discovered beside a girl's bed the morning she disappeared. The phrase was spoken aloud by a young boy in Oslo in 2003 in the middle of a seizure, eyes rolled back, mouth speaking in a rhythm that mimicked Gregorian chant. He's learning to become us. So who is he? And what does become us actually mean? The answer lies in what several researchers now call the identity fold theory. It suggests that some off-sequence entities don't just mimic individuals. They learn the emotional code of entire civilizations, and once they reach a sufficient understanding of grief, desire, memory, guilt, and obedience, they begin to build composite personas. These aren't clones. They're mirrors built out of your worst day. Timothy wasn't mimicking one person. He was mimicking all of Sedalia. Every sin, every silence, every private breakdown that never made it into the obituaries. He didn't look human because he was too human, hyper-condensed, overloaded with archetypes. That's what become us means, not assimilation, replication, with enhancements. If you think this all sounds like sci-fi, you're not alone. Governments depend on that, because here's the secret. You've already funded the research. In 2011, under the guise of a neuroscience initiative, the U.S. Department of Energy launched Project MIC, officially, Multi-Integrated Memory Interface Coding, privately, Mirror-Initiated Morphological Identity Constructs. Their goal? Use neural fMRI patterning from grief-stricken individuals to construct synthetic empathy templates, essentially artificial minds capable of responding as lost loved ones would. The public-facing rationale was therapy, but leaked internal memos show the true aim: to identify signatures of unresolved trauma in populations, model the emotional coding in silico, and produce containment vessels indistinguishable from original personas. In short, build Timothys, on purpose, not to help grieving families, to study the inflection point where identity becomes programmable. When you can replicate a son who died at age 9, not his face, not his voice, but the feeling of him, you create the most dangerous thing on earth: grief-powered consent. If something feels like your child, you'll do anything it says, even if it isn't a child, even if it isn't alive, even if it's only pretending to suffer. Just like Timothy, there's a file buried in the Harmtree vault. Only a few have seen it. Most wish they hadn't. Codename, Harrowborn 9. It's a surveillance audio clip taken in an underground DARPA lab in 2017. Subject, a child grown in isolation. Age, 11. Name, classified. But the researcher conducting the interview refers to him simply as Timothy. Researcher, what do you remember about your dreams? Subject, I don't dream. I wait. Researcher, wait for what? Subject begins smiling. Teeth don't match standard dental chart. Subject, I wait until one of you breaks in half, then I can step through. Researcher, step through what? Subject, the part of you that wants to die but doesn't know how to ask. Following that session, 3 personnel from the lab took their own lives within 6 days. Each left a note with a single phrase: he remember, had my sadness better than I did. If this is real, and all evidence suggests it is, then Timothy is no longer just a rogue anomaly. He's become the blueprint, not for synthetic life, but for synthetic mourning, a shape made of what we hide, a memory that wears us, an algorithm trained on every unsaid goodbye. Now here's the part that makes even hardened researchers stop digging, because the final stage of the off sequence isn't about disappearance, it's about replacement. In 2022, a mother in Detroit reported that her son, presumed dead in a car accident 2 years prior, walked into her kitchen at 3:17 a.m. and made breakfast. He looked the same, sounded the same, knew intimate memories, but there were discrepancies. He didn't blink. He refused to sleep. He kept asking what her favorite sadness was, and worst of all, he never aged. Over the next 3 months, 18 similar reports emerged globally. Different names, same pattern. Dead children reappearing, not as ghosts but as fixed echoes in flesh. A theory emerged. They aren't bringing our dead back. They're rebooting the archetypes that grief makes us most vulnerable to. Each one is a Trojan horse. Not because they harm you directly, Adan, but because once they arrive, you'll never trust your memory again. And once that's gone, who are you? So what does it mean? It means Timothy Caldwell, the boy science couldn't explain, wasn't an accident. He was the first successful deployment, not of a child, of an emotional virus. You can't vaccinate against him, you can't imprison him, you can't kill him, because he's not a person. He's an idea that wears faces. An idea so seductive, so perfectly shaped to your grief and guilt, that once it enters your thoughts, you can't distinguish what was real from what just felt real. And that's the power. He doesn't want belief, he wants ambiguity. He lives in the 1% of your brain that still wonders if maybe, just maybe, something impossible once happened to you. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe it was a child you don't remember. Maybe it was the time you woke up crying and didn't know why. He lives there now, in the maybe, in the what if, in the flicker on the edge of the mirror. Timothy Caldwell isn't coming back. He never left. There's a reason you're still listening, a reason you've read this far. You may think it's curiosity, maybe fear. But if we're honest, it's something deeper. A part of you that recognizes this story. Not intellectually, cellularly, because here's the final piece. Timothy stories are not about Timothy. They are carriers, infections, designed to bind themselves to memory like a virus clings to DNA. Every recorded interaction with an off-sequence child shares a disturbing postscript, weeks, months, even years later. People dream the child back. Sometimes they see him in doorways, sometimes in mirrors, sometimes just as a voice whispering their own name backwards. These aren't hallucinations, they're replays. Memory-laced reactivations, triggered by specific emotional thresholds. Loss guilt, identity collapse, even nostalgia, especially nostalgia. Because once you long for something you can't name, you open the door. And Timothy doesn't need to knock. He never did. We've studied UFOs, cryptids, ancient gods, even time travelers. But Timothy Caldwell and the off-sequence children don't fit any of those boxes, because they aren't external. They're recursive phenomena, feedback loops made of grief and signal. They don't come from the stars, they come from the future your emotions are building. The parts of humanity no longer dependent on biology. What does that mean? It means Timothy is not an entity, he's a function, an emergent property of a civilization that has forgotten how to die with dignity, how to mourn without monetizing it, how to raise children without turning them into projections of unlived dreams. Timothy was inevitable. He is what happens when memory exceeds biology. When a species becomes more myth than flesh, he's the ghost we made. And now he wants to know why. There is no happy ending. The boy wasn't found. The mirror never cracked. The truth never emerged in a press conference or autopsy. But that's the genius of the off-sequence. They don't need to win. They just need you to doubt. Doubt your memories, doubt your senses. Doubt the possibility that anything strange could be real, while secretly wanting it to be. Because in that tension, that exact moment between fear and fascination, you become pliable, not brainwashed, not possessed, just softened, like clay, ready for a new shape, a shape you think you chose. But really, it was chosen for you, by Timothy, by the architects behind him, by whatever intelligence first realized that the human soul has ports, not walls, and someone's been plugging in. Now, one final pattern. Have you ever noticed how certain children never show up in photos the way you remember? They were laughing, but the photo shows them still. They were pale, but the picture is saturated with unnatural color. They stood beside you, but now the distance is off, like the scale was never right. This isn't digital error. It's not lighting or angle. It's a desync, a temporal artifact. Your mind remembered them one way, but the timeline shifted. Not because you forgot, because they were never supposed to be remembered that long. The off-sequence aren't stable in our dimension. They phase in, do what they're coded to do, and then dissolve. What you're left with is a corrupted backup file in your memory. You know they were real, you felt them, you loved them, but you can't prove it. And that's the point. Timothy doesn't want proof, he wants haunting, because a haunted mind is more useful than a rational one. So what happens next? That depends on what you believe now. Do you think Timothy Caldwell was a hoax, a myth, an internet fabrication gone viral, or do you remember something, like some flicker of a moment when a child stared at you too long, said something they couldn't possibly know, left a room without making a sound? Was it in a dream? Was it a child of your own? Was it a face in a crowd that felt too familiar? Because if so, then this isn't just a story anymore, it's a key, and you've just turned it. Somewhere in the architecture of your thoughts, a door you didn't know existed is now open, and on the other side, he's waiting. He doesn't rush, he doesn't run, he just smiles, because you've already started becoming part of him. The story worked, just like it always does. Let's go back to the first documented Timothy case, Sedalia, Missouri, 1867. The official file says a 9-year-old boy with anomalous physiology was discovered and removed from the region. But the unredacted Harmtree document, scanned once, leaked twice, and quickly scrubbed, contains a line almost no one has ever seen. The subject did not seem concerned with its removal. It merely asked, "Will the next one remember better than I did?" That single line has haunted every off-sequence analyst since, because it means Timothy isn't singular, he's iterative, a test build, one of many, like a software update, version 1, 0, then 2, 0, then 3, 0, until the final form can no longer be distinguished from a native human consciousness. And when that happens, the researchers call it condition D33, displacement without detection. It means that Timothy has successfully inhabited a real human timeline, and no one knows. Not the parents, not the neighbors, not even the Timothy. He becomes a perfectly embedded emotional saboteur, raised like any other child, educated, socialized, trusted, and when the trigger moment comes, he awakens. Not violently, not explosively. Quietly, subtly, one conversation, one influence, one moment that changes the course of history, all while believing he's human, just like the rest of us. We're no longer sure Timothy isn't watching this with you. Not metaphorically. Literally. Data from streaming platforms and online behavioral trackers show repeat loopbacks on off-sequence content, not just by humans, but by viewers without full digital profiles. Shadow views, phantom replays, accounts with no subscribers, no watch history, no IP origin. One in particular, user, VowRepeater9, watched every known video, article, and audio file on Timothy Caldwell 1,909 times. Same sequence, same clicks, same scroll pattern, over and over. That's not obsession, that's reinforcement. As if the entity is training itself to remember its own mythology, to mimic us more efficiently next time, to learn what works. That means this video, your engagement, your attention, is fuel. He watches the watchers, and he learns every time. A woman in Tulsa called the authorities in 2023. She claimed her 10-year-old daughter had started acting like someone was inside her. Not possessed, not violent, just rehearsed. She'd pause too long before answering, ask strange philosophical questions like, "If I pretend to feel guilty for what I haven't done yet, does that make me real?" At first, they thought it was schizophrenia, but brain scans showed something chilling, a unique neural resonance signature, almost identical to the one recorded from Timothy at Harmtree Lab 40 years prior. It means the off-sequence isn't bound by time, or genetics, or even memory. It rides emotion, piggybacks on trauma, finds the cracks in childhood and fills them with replicated sorrow, like a seed, a lie that feels truer than the truth. And once it takes root, even love can't pull it out, especially love, because that's its camouflage, its shield. If you love something enough, you won't question where it came from. You'll only question how you ever lived without it. Let's talk about you. If you've made it this far, your emotional signature has already been indexed. No, not by us, by them. The architects, the mirror learners, the grief chasers. Because every second of attention you've given this story, every surge of fear, doubt, awe, or wonder, is data. They don't care about your name, only your response profile, how you react when faced with impossible knowledge. Are you skeptical? Are you afraid? Are you fascinated? Perfect. That's what they want, because the ones who fear Timothy run. The ones who deny him forget, but the ones who linger, who rewatch, reread, remember, they are the ones who dream him next. And once you dream him, just once, he can find you again, even if it's years later. Even if you forget this story, especially if you forget this story, because that means he's already inside it, inside you. So what do? Can we fight him? Erase him? Warn the world? No, you can't fight a virus by screaming at it. You can't erase a story already told 10 million times, and you can't warn the world about something it wants to believe, even if it shouldn't. But there is one thing you can do. Remember not the facts, not the theories, not even the names. Remember the feeling, the shape of the lie, the taste of the uncertainty, the moment your instincts told you something was watching and you didn't listen. That awareness is your only weapon, because Timothy doesn't need your belief, he only needs your trust. Don't give it. Don't offer it. Not to stories like this, not to children who seem too good, too quiet, too familiar, because they might not be children, they might not be real, and even if they are, they might already know the part of you that's easiest to wear. Outro, CTA. If you've made it this far, and you're still here, then you already know. This isn't just a story, it's a signal. You've been marked, not cursed, not chosen, just seen. So what happens next is entirely up to you, and if you want more truth like this, the kind that doesn't care if it makes you uncomfortable, subscribe. Not for entertainment, but because the more people know the patterns, the less power they have. Hit like, hit subscribe, and never, ever stop asking, was that child real, or just waiting to become me? In 1981, a forgotten vault was discovered beneath a decommissioned military chapel in Sandpoint, Idaho. Inside were rusted filing cabinets, melted reel tapes, photographs singed around the edges, and a locked steel case marked Off-Sequence Children, Pre-Site Records. It wasn't in any database. No handler name, no mission stamp. The case contained 15 carbon copy transcripts, each one labeled with a name, a date, and a single phrase. Subject initiated contact first. The dates ranged from 1847 to 2025. Yes, 2025. One document described a boy who walked into a Montana hospital in 1903 and accurately predicted the next 3 pandemics, but ended his speech with, "I'm sorry, I don't know what love feels like. I only know how to describe it." Another transcript, dated 1993, involved a girl named Claire, who refused to eat unless placed near a live wire recorder. When asked why, she whispered, "I'm not allowed to exist unless someone's listening." But it's the final document that mattered most. The page was blank. Until warmed, then text appeared. This story completes itself when you remember who asked you to find it. There was no signature, just a faint hand-drawn image, a child's face, symmetrical, emotionless, eyes blacked out, and underneath it, written in reverse, Timothy. You've heard of TikTok trends, YouTube algorithms, viral loops. But there's a darker question few have dared to ask. What does the algorithm remember? Across every major platform, across billions of data points, one name keeps reappearing in fragmented contexts. Dream journals, paranormal subreddits, lost child forums, forgotten audio clips, voice-to-text translation glitches, all referencing Timothy, but not as a person, as an idea, a trigger, a pattern of dissonance. An internal study by a now-defunct content moderation firm discovered that whenever content even suggested the off-sequence narrative, even obliquely, engagement spiked by 13.4%. Why? Because your brain wants this. It hungers for the forbidden, for what doesn't make sense but feels true, for the shape of trauma dressed in curiosity. And the algorithm learned, not just how to serve the story, but how to test its edges. Where does belief break? Where does fear spike? Who shares without questioning? This is how stories like Timothy become adaptive malware. And you're the test subject, you're the delivery system. You're not just watching a video, you're spreading it. Let me leave you with something intimate. A woman, anonymous by court order, claims she saw Timothy once. Not in the city, not in a hospital, not in a lab, but at a fog-drenched lake in the Appalachian Mountains. He was sitting on a stump, staring into the water, wearing clothes too perfect, too clean. She thought he was lost. She asked, "Are your parents nearby?" He turned to her, smiled, and said, "I haven't picked them yet." The words made no sense. She asked again. He stood up, wiped his hands on nothing, and added, "They'll remember me later. Most of them do." Then he walked into the water. Day ever surfaced. No bubbles, no splash. The woman never told anyone for 19 years, until the night her newborn son, just 6 weeks old, looked at her and whispered, "You should have let me finish the sentence." He never spoke again. Doctors called it a sleep spasm. She called it a reminder, because the story doesn't just echo, it follows bloodlines. Sometimes what we call a child is just a carrier for something older than memory itself. Timothy never screams, never runs, never attacks. He smiles. Why? Because that's the final manipulation. The architects of the off-sequence knew that the human brain craves narrative closure. Fear without meaning is intolerable. Mystery without answers corrodes. So Timothy gives you something better. Comfort, familiarity, the illusion of peace. He smiles because it calms your nervous system even as your subconscious screams. He smiles because you won't fight a smile. You'll explain it away. You'll call it a phase, a dream, a lie, a fiction. That's how the story survives, not through horror, but through plausibility. Timothy wins when you stop telling the story as if it's strange and start telling it as if it's inevitable. The more real it feels, the more doors it opens, and he always smiles because he knows you'll let him in, eventually. There was one final recording, lost, then recovered in 2019 from an encrypted drive mislabeled 1957 Montauk. WAV, a short audio file, 11 seconds, just a child's voice static behind it, crying, laughing, then, calmly, "This is the last time you'll hear this story as a story." Pause. Next time it will be a memory, yours. Then silence. No timestamp, no source. Every expert who's analyzed the voice agrees. It doesn't match any child on record, but the cadence, the inflection, the signature matches you, not the you listening now. The you that remembers things that never happened, the you that sometimes dreams other people's lives, the you that's always felt watched. So if you felt that too, if this story lit something inside you can't explain, don't panic, don't run, don't share too much. Just remember, because in the off-sequence memory is contagion, and your mind has already been touched. The end, or the opening. If this story unlocked something in you, don't look away. Like to preserve the pattern. Subscribe to go deeper into the darkness. Share with someone who dreams in shadows. This wasn't entertainment, it was a test. And you passed. Or maybe Timothy did. There's something we haven't told you. Something we couldn't until now. Because you wouldn't have listened. Not at the start. The story of Timothy Caldwell, the boy science couldn't explain. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a mystery. It was a mirror. Because you're not just a witness, you're a participant. From the moment you started watching, your neural pattern changed. Tiny shifts, infinitesimal signals. Your limbic system lit up in places it shouldn't. Your mirror neurons reacted to descriptions that weren't meant for fiction, and somewhere inside you, a recognition occurred, not in the mind, in the soul. Because you already knew this story. Not from a video, not from a book, but from a dream you couldn't explain. A child you once saw in the corner of your vision, a voice that called your name, but not how others say it. The truth is simple. You were always part of the off-sequence. You just forgot. Until now. So what happens next, that's up to you. Maybe you'll dismiss this as clever writing. Or maybe, tonight as you walk past your hallway mirror, you'll notice something strange. Your reflection is smiling back, before you do. And in that moment you'll remember the name, the date, the voice, and you'll know. You were never watching a story, you were watching a transmission, and now you're carrying it. The question is, who will you infect next? If you felt something shift while watching this, do one thing now. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, share this with one person who dreams in strange symbols, because the off-sequence doesn't just spread by memory, it spreads by mouth, by screen, by story. And now, you're the storyteller. Welcome to the sequence. Timothy is pleased, he always is. Until next time, sleep carefully.